Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. What a day it is to be talking to you about Georgia football, because Georgia got itself a great commit yesterday. Jaden Riddell, big-time impressive tight end for the class of 2024, becomes the next to commit to the G, continuing it is certainly, undeniably, unquestionably a huge level of momentum right now for these dogs in the recruiting trail. We're going to talk about all of that and all there is to like about Jaden Riddell. Many of you are already well-versed in a lot of this, but we'll bring the rest of our audience up to speed here over the course of the next couple of minutes there as well. Also, interesting development yesterday as it relates to the future of Georgia-Florida in Jacksonville. This is interesting. We're going to cover that in full detail on the program here today. Terrence Edwards stops by. That is always a lot of fun. I kind of rolled my eyes at something I read at ESPN.com this morning. It wasn't actually even all that new. It's been out for a week or so. I just hadn't happened to see it until today. So we'll tell you about that. Greg Sankey's spoken out a little bit too. That's kind of interesting. And we're going to set the stage for next week with some of you who've just been great with some of the things you've been sending in to me as of late. So we're going to do some of that here coming up in just a little bit there as well. A lot of ground to cover. Glad to have you with us as we do it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
By now you're aware, Georgia got some very good recruiting news yesterday as Jaden Riddell, very impressive tight end from Missouri, 4-star, made his announced commitment to the University of Georgia. You look at the numbers a little deeper here. What you see is number 3 overall tight end according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, which typically speaking what we kind of use around here. You kind of dive into the individual recruiting sites' various rankings of him. I guess one of the sites had him as like only the number 5 tight end, which kind of weighs down his overall kind of average player rating. But maybe more important than any of that is, according to, once again, the 24/7 Sports Composite, this is the number 55 player in the entire country. So this is a massive, massive get for Georgia. And I think in situations like this, it's always really appropriate to kind of do two things at once. You know, on the one hand, the Riddell story here kind of fits into a larger theme around Georgia at the moment, which is, hey, big scavenger hunt this past weekend, leading into a massive series of official visits first weekend in June. You kind of got Memorial Day weekend kind of in between that, where hopefully these Georgia coaches will get a chance to get a little bit of downtime. I hope that's the case anyway. But, you know, you kind of have this major seismic series of events as it relates to Georgia recruiting. So on the one hand, Riddell just sort of feels like a continuation of a lot of that. He becomes the 3rd Georgia committed this particular week, the 2nd tight end. So Georgia's obviously been very busy in recruiting, and you kind of think about Riddell within that context. But as I said before, when you're talking about somebody who rates as, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, number 55 player in the entire country, who kind of stands right there alongside Landon Thomas, a guy that we've talked about before, as really kind of the best tight end in the entire, you know, country at his particular, in his particular class here right now, I think it's important to also kind of pull out and address the Riddell part of this individually within kind of a fishbowl of just itself. And there is no doubt this is a major, major commit being added by Georgia here right now. There is a lot to like about this. And if you have not taken some time to kind of acquaint yourself with some of the video that's out there of Riddell, I'm telling you right now, he fits in very well with the kind of athletic tight ends that Georgia has been bringing in over the course of the last few years. I would certainly not say he's the next Brock Bowers, but when you think about the kind of outsized athleticism that Bowers brought to the tight end position, there's a lot I see from Riddell that sort of looks like that style of player. The same way that Oscar Delp kind of had that view, and by the way, more on him in a moment. But the way that Oscar Delp kind of had that look, the way that Lawson Lucky has had that look as a part of the 2023 class, that Georgia has just kind of set its sights on, set its targets on this unique category of tight ends in recent years, of guys who just bring a phenomenal level of athleticism to that position and bring that with them to Georgia. And Riddell, I think, is the next in line on all of that. And even in the midst of this, what could be a historic run for Georgia recruiting as the finishing touches get put on the 2024 class, taking time to appreciate the individual names and the individual contributors to that class, like Riddell, probably pretty important. It's worth acquainting yourself with just how good of a player this is. You can read all about him and see plenty of footage on him and things like that if you go check out DawgNation.com. Really good story from Jeff Sintel about that yesterday. Now, that's the one part of this, how good Riddell is individually. But as we said before, it is also a part of an undeniable trend right now where Georgia is just seemingly picking up a lot of steam. And no doubt what the genesis of most of this was. This was the commitment a few days ago from the nation's number one prospect, the five-star quarterback, Dylan Raiola. And one of the things I've loved, if you're, paying attention to Dylan on social media, is all the cheerleading that he's doing right now for all the other commits that Georgia's getting, including being very quick yesterday to kind of jump in and celebrate what Riddell brings to this class. In fact, I want to show you Dylan Raiola here on Twitter, enjoying the Riddell commitment. The phrase that gets used a lot of times is tight end tough, and that was kind of the graphic that our friends over at On3 put together for Jaden Riddell. Great-looking image there, great-looking graphic there. And Dylan Raiola jumped in to celebrate Jaden Riddell by calling Georgia, as he says, tight end university. And if you're a quarterback like Raiola, you can certainly see the value in that of, hey, how do I become the best possible quarterback I can be? How do I get the most going on here? Obviously, it's by having great tight ends to throw to that has clearly worked very well for Stetson Bennett. Brock Bowers has helped make him, an all-time great in the annals of Georgia football and SEC football history. And Dylan Raiola knows that when he steps on the field and gets a chance to one day compete to be the Georgia starting quarterback, he's going to have a great crop of tight ends to throw to there as well. Certainly Jaden Riddell being one of those, and he's very happy to celebrate all of that. So that's definitely something I think the Georgia fans should like about the Riddell news from yesterday. But something else that I think you ought to like and ought to notice here too is the individual personality that Riddell brings here. And I have to say that this is something I've only recently kind of become acquainted with, become aware of, that apparently Riddell brings a little swagger to that tight end room for Georgia here. Some Georgia fans were kind of sharing this around yesterday. I'll show you this from a guy called John Tweet Sports on Twitter, who had some TikTok video of Riddell doing a 7-on-7 thing, and I took a snapshot of this. Riddell's out there running around doing his, competing in this 7-on-7 drill while he's got sunglasses on. It's almost like something from a movie from the 80s or something like that. He's out there playing football with the sunglasses on and having a good time, doing that on the 7-on-7 circuit. So he kind of brings a little swagger to the tight end position. Obviously brings incredible athleticism. You go back and look at some of his measurable sprint times and things like that. This is a big-time athlete here that Georgia brings in, and it would seem to be a precursor that more good things are on the way, because much the same way a guy like Dylan Raiola on social media as of late has been celebrating every one of these commitments. You've also got a good number of Georgia commits who are also kind of foreshadowing what is still yet to come for this 2024 class. In fact, just shortly before Riddell made his announcement, you had a guy like Nick Saban on social media. He was definitely fanning the flames for all kinds of big stuff potentially going down for Georgia. Carr, of course, was here for the scavenger hunt this past weekend. He says we're about to go up on social media. Gives you a string of those bulldog emojis there. And what's maybe extra interesting about Nick Saban saying this just ahead of what turned out to be the Riddell commitment is, we obviously know that Carr is a high school teammate of Landon Thomas. Thomas was a tight end commit to the University of Georgia who flipped to Florida State. A lot of folks kind of wonder what was going on there, and there was even kind of a wonder and a concern of, well, how would Nick Carr react to his high school teammate leaving the Georgia class to join up with Florida State? Well, it sounds like Nick Carr is just as excited as ever about the things that are happening in Georgia, Riddell, and all the other big news that's about to come into place here. He's clearly foreshadowing a lot of that. Now, I'll also say as a quick aside here that just because Georgia brings in Riddell, I don't see any reason why it necessarily needs to stop recruiting Landon Thomas either. I realize that spots are tight and you can't have nothing. You certainly can't have 1,000 tight ends, but I'm also kind of of the belief that you sort of recruit best player available here. And, if Landon Thomas sees all the energy that's happening around Georgia and he wants to make the same decision that Jaden Riddell did, I'd say let's try to find some room for him here with the Dogs if that is indeed possible. But at the same time, Georgia's also moving on. It didn't slow down for a minute because Thomas decommitted, flipped to Florida State. And so if Landon Thomas or anybody else wants to be part of this Georgia class, my suggestion to you, you better be jumping on that opportunity quick, because we're seeing how fast right now all of these spots are filling up, and more Georgia commits predicting more big things to come. I saw this the other day. Justin Scott's obviously one of the best defensive linemen in the entire country, a big-time prize target for UGA. He's obviously nearing his decision time here coming up. Well, another Georgia wide receiver commit. We just heard from Nikar a moment ago. Nitro Tuggle was also out there calling his shot about what Georgia might be eventually able to do with Justin Scott here as well. I'll show you Nitro on Twitter when Justin Scott was predicting that he was getting very close to making his commitment announcement. Nitro Tuggle had his own prediction to say that Scott's going to be a dog as well. So Georgia fans, I think, are enjoying all of this right now. There's so much energy around this 2024 class. Guys like Jaden Riddell are really recruits worth celebrating, and they also seem to be the next in what is like to be a pretty large snowball starting to form here in terms of the overall momentum. But before we move on, I want to kind of think about one more thing here just for a moment. And I went back and tried to find this audio. Over the course of years, I've just sort of lost some audio. Just over the course of time, you sort of have a little bit of leakage with clips that you used to have. You just don't have them anymore. You go back a few years ago, you can find examples of Kirby Smart, taking kind of like tough questions from the media. Hey, why don't you throw the tight ends more? What's going on? You got these tight ends, but you're not really using them. What is the deal about that? And Kirby Smart was having to sort of fight back on that of, basically trying to defend the program for why it wasn't using tight ends more. I mean, this was during the Kirby Smart era. This is like a few years ago. This was not, sometime in the black and white era or the, 4:3 aspect ratio. This era, this was only just a few years ago. Like this wasn't that long ago that Kirby Smart was having to fight back against the media who were criticizing him for not throwing two tight ends more. And a lot of Georgia fans were, the reason why the media was asking Kirby Smart that, because a lot of fans were asking the media, how come Georgia's not throwing the tight ends more? This was a big issue for this program. And Kirby Smart was having to defend against that and fight back against that. Can you imagine how things have changed? I mean, can you really take time to appreciate how things have changed? Obviously, we give a lot of the credit to Todd Hartley for this. He has brought these tight ends in, and I think he's also been a very strong advocate for the tight ends in terms of making sure that, previously it's been Todd Monken, now it'll be Mike Bobo, that the offensive coordinator stands ready to use these tight ends in games and make them a focal point of the Georgia offense, and that's clearly working out very well. But it's a total transformation in perception, right? I mean, you go back to a couple of cycles ago when Oscar Delp came into the Georgia program. Delp, who I think, at least in terms of state of Georgia tight ends, about as good as we've seen, right? I mean, big-time athlete, big-time capable playmaker. I think Delp's in line for a very good year here this year. And when he talked about why it was that he came to Georgia, I mean, you're left to remark about just how much the overall landscape of things, how it's changed. And at one point in time, maybe negative perception that people had, that recruits had about the tight end spot here at Georgia, all of a sudden now it's got an open for business sign as big as all outdoors, and Jaden Riddell and everybody else seems to want to jump in line to be a part of it. I love what Delp said when he talked about his decision to commit to Georgia, because I think the words that he used probably echo why guys like Riddell and Lawson Lucky and Pierce Spurlin after that have kind of made the same decision. This is what Delp said a couple of years ago.
I mean, it really just came down to where I'm going to get developed the most and have the best opportunity to make a name for myself and really kind of get the ball. And I think that Georgia has developed offensive line, developed defense, and every week in practice I'm really going to be getting reps against the best players in the country, and I think it's really going to make me a better player in the long run. And I love what they're doing with Bowers so far this year, and how they're going to use us together in the future. I think is really going to be a cool thing.
Do not miss that. Oscar Delp said that Brock Bowers' success became a proof of concept. It wasn't a theoretical thing of, hey, we need you so bad, and if we get you, we'll use you. No, it was, hey, watch what this guy is doing. When Delp said that, it was reflecting on the 2021 season, Brock Bowers' first season at Georgia. Watch what he's doing. You can be next in line on that. Well, since then, Brock Bowers' game has only gone to a higher level, and guys like Oscar Delp only have more, I guess, ambition to be the next in line to be able to do that. But the point of playing the clip is not what it meant for Oscar Delp, but the fact that Oscar Delp's words there, I think, stand as a template for why Pierce Spurlin and Lawson Lucky made the decision they made, why guys like Jaden Riddell made the decision that he made yesterday, that this has really become the destination spot for tight ends. Todd Hartley calls them tight end tough. Well, what Todd Hartley is right now is very tough to beat on the recruiting trail. No one's adding more elite tight ends than Georgia. No one's using them more effectively, and it's been a wonderful recipe for back-to-back national championships. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. We are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev. And we are available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, everything else in between, including posting the show each day at the world-famous DawgNation.com. So happy to have you with us for all of that, and so thankful to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make today's show possible. You know, they are your source for Georgia divorce, and I realize that it's not a fun conversation. I really, really do. And sometimes it seems like summertime kind of brings about more of this kind of stuff. You know, maybe you kind of slow down a little bit, maybe you got some vacation time coming up, and you know, sometimes situations like that kind of exasperate what is kind of always been going on, maybe below the surface. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that flippantly. I say that with, you know, great sadness, because a relationship coming to an end is not an easy thing. That is a painful thing for many of you. And while I wish that I could just snap my fingers and make that go away, make that disappear, I can't do that. Sometimes in life, reality just sort of has to be confronted. It just sort of has to be, you know, faced head on. And our folks at Merriweather and Tharp can make that process a little easier for you, because they want to walk with you through it. And when you go through what might be the most challenging scenario you face in your life thus far, having someone who can be there with you and be a strong advocate for you, that's just really, really valuable, especially someone who maybe can lean on the experience they've gained from having been through this thousands of times. And when it comes to the combined experience for all the attorneys there at Merriweather and Tharp, that's truly the kind of institutional knowledge they bring into all this, earned, lived experience of how the divorce process is played out and how it can play out for you, and how you can leverage the law to your benefit to get the most out of your situation. Because all of this is about making the most and the best of the time that we have, and putting yourself in a position to have a successful next season of your life is just so important. And the decisions you make right now, including the decision to hire Merriweather and Tharp, is going to help you do that. So have that initial consultation with one of those Merriweather and Tharp attorneys. Let them hear your story, and then let you hear the ways in which they can get to work for you, and the ways in which they can kind of lay a foundation and some groundwork for everything to kind of fall into place for you. So find them online. It's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, a little bit of housekeeping here, and then we're going to get ready to roll on. First of all, it's Terrence Edwards coming up in a couple of moments. Always love having Terrence here on a Thursday. We're going to look forward to doing that here in a couple of minutes' time. Also, many of you are aware of this. We are live today, normal show just like always. Live tomorrow on Friday. Once again, normal show just like always. We will not have a show on Memorial Day. Typically speaking, there are like 4 holidays that we don't typically do a show for. Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July. Pretty much any other Monday through Friday holiday we typically do a show for. There are about 4 like that we don't typically do a show for. And so one of those will be on Monday. Hopefully you're getting ready to enjoy some time with your family and friends there too. Kind of an unofficial kickoff to the summer, as we obviously, you know, have a lot on our mind related to those who paid the ultimate price and you know, made the ultimate sacrifice for the country that we all love. So we'll be doing that on Monday. And then the rest of the week, Tuesday through Friday, I'm going to be on vacation. Now, we have put together, I think, a great collection of shows. Many of you are a part of that. You've shared some bold predictions with us. We're going to do kind of a bold predictions theme. Next week, we're going to have more on that here coming up in just a little bit, too, kind of setting the stage what next week's going to look like. So that is going to be a lot of fun. But just go ahead and kind of be aware. There'll be no 1st and 15 next week because of the fact we will not be live. But everything else will pretty much be normal. And if something big happens with the SEC spring meetings taking place in Destin, Florida, or obviously maybe more pertinent, something big happening as it relates to UGA recruiting, of course the DawgNation team will be ready to go live and talk to you and get you up to date on all that. We won't be hitting the live news, the in-the-moment news during next week's shows because we've obviously pre-recorded them. But we will be back the following Monday to cover all of that. So just want to give you that little bit of heads up there on that. Now, speaking of enjoying some time, many of you enjoy the world's largest outdoor cocktail parties. We transition to Around the Dawghouse here today. There is new information on the cocktail party and what I believe is kind of new life for the idea that the game could remain in Jacksonville. We at least know this. Announcement came from both Georgia and Florida yesterday that the game in Jacksonville, which the official term of the contract ends with this year's game, but there was an option year in place for the next 2 years. That's 2024 and 2025. And both schools had until June 30th, I believe that's the day, June 30th, to announce their decision to extend or not. Well, yesterday it did come out that the game will remain in Jacksonville for another 2 years. So this year in 2023, and then contract extension years, the option years that were a part of the initial term of the contract for 2024 and 2025. I'm going to show you what Josh Brooks had to say about this yesterday in the official release that came out from Georgia. This is, of course, the UGA athletic director. He says, we're pleased with the decision to exercise the option that will keep the game in Jacksonville for 2024 and 2025. So this is kind of a part of the initial term of that contract. This is not a new contract. This is just the option year that was available with the original contract. Sometimes you see this with like player contracts, things like that. There's a team option or a player option. Well, in this particular case, the two schools involved in this long-term deal with Jacksonville had the option to extend if they wanted to. They had the power to make that decision. Brooks goes on to say, we look forward to discussions that I'm sure will continue over the next couple of years, exploring all the options for 2026 and beyond. We continue to be appreciative of the working relationship we have with the University of Florida and the city of Jacksonville. That is Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks. All right, so let's talk about kind of a lot of, I guess, offshoots of this topic here for a moment. I think the most important thing that you hear Brooks say there is that with this extended for 2 years, all it really does is probably buy time for both Georgia and Florida to continue their negotiations with Jacksonville about, I believe, trying to make sure they get the very best and biggest possible deal if this game is going to remain in Jacksonville going forward. And one of the things that we've seen kind of come out of the city here over the course of the last, couple of weeks or so is, I think, kind of a renewed commitment to keep this game there. They have indicated, the city has, the outgoing mayor, and even, I guess, some of the, the politics around the new mayor that's coming in, they have indicated just how important they believe this to be. There's also been a statement being made in one of the news stories that's been out there lately from the Jacksonville Jaguars organization, someone within the organization saying that they fully understand that the biggest game that takes place in Jacksonville every year is not a Jaguars game. It is the Georgia-Florida game, that the Jacksonville Jaguars recognize just how important the Georgia-Florida game is to Jacksonville because of all the money that it brings in. This is important because the stadium there in Jacksonville, it's changed its name a million times. I believe it's TIAAF or whatever it is now. It used to be known as the Gator Bowl. It's changed its name 1,000 times. The stadium that the Jacksonville Jaguars call home is due for some renovation. So on the basis of the fact that the Georgia-Florida game is going to be played there 2024 and 2025, that sets up, I believe, 2026 and 2027 to be the 2-year span in which the renovations will take place. There have been some debate and some sort of muddled reporting about which years were going to be the renovation years, but the extension being announced for Georgia-Florida kind of pushes that Jacksonville Stadium renovation, I believe, to 2026 and 2027. Now, here's what I think. I think Jacksonville, the city here, would love to get an extension in place with Georgia-Florida prior to those renovations beginning. I think they want Georgia and Florida to be major stakeholders in the discussions about the new stadium complex and how it's going to look and how the river will be transformed. I think they want that. And obviously what Georgia and Florida seem to want here is the best possible deal they can get, which I think they feel like they have a lot of leverage to be able to do that. Now, a couple of more points here just for a moment. It has been discussed that, in that 2026 and 2027, while this stadium is being renovated, that Georgia and Florida would then go home and home in Athens and Gainesville, and maybe both sides, or certainly at least the Georgia side of this, they may decide they like the game being home and home so much that at that point they don't want to go back to Jacksonville anymore. Well, there was some interesting reporting the other day from Andy Staples from The Athletic, who kind of suggested something a little bit different than that. The notion that, hey, actually what you don't maybe realize is that because of how much money they make from playing this game in Jacksonville and because of how expensive it is to go on the road and play a road game, and even, hosting a home game, has its own kind of debits that go along with that actually Georgia and Florida may actually like the neutral site game more than people realize from the financial standpoint of this. And it's not a given that in those 2 years in which the Jacksonville Stadium is being renovated, that Georgia and Florida actually will be home and home. They may shop it around to Orlando or Atlanta or even like a Tampa or Miami. Certainly not a guarantee that's going to happen, but it is a suggestion that the two schools have really kind of gotten used to the easy check they get for playing in Jacksonville without any of the hassle of having to travel to a true road game or host a home game. It's just a lot more lucrative to play this game in Jacksonville. So the overall bottom line takeaway that I think you should have on this, and listen, I don't mind telling you, when I have an obvious bias on something, I try to make sure you're aware of that. I want to be honest with you, and you can judge the value of my words based on the perspective that I'm coming from. I love the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. I want this game to remain in Jacksonville, so I don't mind telling you what my wishes are on this. Many of you feel different. I actually respect your opinion on this. I think this is one of those things that reasonable people can disagree about. But as someone who has kind of a vested interest in this discussion, I'd love to see tradition prevail, this game remain in Jacksonville. Apart from that, as objective as I'm capable of being, I think it's been interesting to watch the evolution here, where a few months ago, I was sort of the belief that because the SEC was about to announce some major schedule changes, at the very least, they're doing away with divisions. They're bringing 2 new teams into the league. There are going to be fewer permanent opponents than there have been in the past. We don't yet know. Is it a 9-game conference slate with 3 permanent opponents? Is it an 8-game conference slate with 1 permanent opponent? We don't know exactly the shape of the Georgia schedule yet. We're going to find out that maybe next week. But because we at least know there's a lot of change coming to the SEC, I thought this was just one more change we would likely have to endure, one more thing we would likely have to get ready to say goodbye to. No more cocktail party. I got to tell you, over the course of the last month or so, watching some of the news coming out of Jacksonville, the value the people in that city put on this game, understanding more about the finances and how lucrative it is for both Georgia and Florida to play this game there, I think Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville has a lot more life left in it than I probably realized. And if I were to make a prediction now, my prediction is the game actually probably does stay in Jacksonville post-stadium renovation. How long into the future that goes, I don't know. But I no longer think this game is on life support. I no longer think the cocktail party is on the verge of being canceled. I've kind of changed my opinion on that a little bit, and I guess I reserve the right to change my mind again. But I just think new information has kind of led to a little bit of an evolution on my thought. Now, the big cloud that hangs over all of this is the fact that we know that Kirby Smart does not prefer that. I joked about this on video yesterday when we went live for the Riddell announcement, and then the Georgia-Florida thing dropped while we were on the air, that it's certainly conspicuous that in the release that Georgia put out yesterday, there was no quote from Kirby Smart, the way there commonly would be about any kind of news related to the Georgia football program. I'm not saying Smart was, off in a corner pouting. I'm just saying that people know his opinion on this, and try to pretend like this was a happy thing would be somewhat disingenuous, and so therefore Smart wasn't quoted at all. But it's also important to note that while we can certainly point to plenty of moments like the SEC Network last summer or other instances where Smart has been very vocal about his desire to change this game and make it home and home, there are other moments in which he's kind of spoken a little bit more softly about this topic, when he's been more than happy to kind of recognize how valuable it is for a number of different reasons. I want to give you an example of this from like last October, where Smart was probably taking a little softer tone related to the future of the cocktail party than maybe he's often taken in the past. And so for the full context of exactly what is at stake here, Smart's desire to play it at home and home, while also acknowledging the value of this game in Jacksonville for both traditional and monetary reasons, this is what Kirby Smart said about this last October.
Yeah, there's really quality benefits to both. And you guys, I get it. You want to make a story, you need a story, everybody wants to talk about it. It's really not a big debate for me. It's been made really big by the media because they've made it out to be a really big deal. I enjoy the pageantry of going down there playing. I enjoyed playing there as a player. I enjoy tradition. I enjoy all those things. When it comes down to it, there's the very, very basic element of everything comes back to, number one, money, and number two, recruiting and getting good players. I firmly believe that we'll be able to sign better players by having home and home because we'll have more opportunities to get them to campus. But I also think there's a financial factor that factors into that with having the game there and being able to make more money for the university possibly there. So you have to weigh both of those and make really good decisions. But I promise you I have not thought about that 1 second since the start of the season. And I'm not going to think about it for 1 second because I got to worry about coaching our team. And I'm not fighting the fight in the public forum. I'm not fighting a fight for anything. I'm worried about our team and us playing well and how we block and tackle and what plays we call and how we play special teams. That's just not a priority for me where that game is right now.
So bottom line, here's the blunt question. Will Georgia, the athletic department, choose money over the wishes of Kirby Smart? The honest answer is, I think it depends on how much money we're talking about. And that's what we're going to find out in the months to come. Just how much is Jacksonville willing to pay Georgia to be a marquee game in a brand new stadium coming up a few years from now, or at least a very, very newish looking stadium a couple of years from now. So stay tuned for more on today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Before we're done, there was something in ESPN this morning, ESPN.com, that actually wasn't even that new. I just saw it for the first time today. That kind of caused me to roll my eyes here a little bit. So we'll talk about why that is if you're a Georgia fan. I think you may join me on this. And speaking of Georgia fans, before we're done, I'm going to let you hear from a handful of Georgia fans here today as a way to set the stage for something really fun we're going to do next week. We're going to do a little bit of that before we are done today. Plus, Greg Sankey, speaking of the idea of change to the SEC, Sankey has kind of spoken out again about the, kind of plan and strategy that was in place for the SEC as it recently kind of pursued some conference expansion. We'll talk about what this means for the future going forward before we're all said and done today there as well. But for now, on everything as it relates to Georgia football, including what there is to like about a brand new commit, let's talk about it all with Terrence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Lots to talk to Terrence Edwards about, including a great commit to the program yesterday. But Terrence, before that, I know we talked about this a little bit last week, kind of the future of Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville. You've kind of expressed your opinion. You wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of a rotational type thing moving forward there. Well, at least for now, we found out yesterday that this game is going to remain in Jacksonville for a couple of more years, at least 2024 and 2025. We'll find out after some stadium expansion what the long-term future for the cocktail party is. But as I told our folks a little earlier, I'm actually a little surprised by how this has kind of evolved and developed over the last month or so. I thought we were maybe heading for a cancellation of the cocktail party, that the wishes of Kirby Smart, the winds of change in the SEC, it was just going to dictate this game no longer be played at the neutral site. But since then, I have been a little bit, as I said before, surprised by what's kind of taking place here, where this game apparently has a lot more life left in it in Jacksonville than I initially realized. I guess what's your reaction here that for a couple more years anyway, game going to be played there at the neutral site venue?
Well, I'm kind of not shocked. I think this is a venue that everyone likes, even though I may contest that I still would like to see the rotation. I would like to see the games played on home and home, especially. But I'm not shocked that they're going to continue. And at the end of the day, it's all about money. So somehow, some way, I assume both schools got the money that they wanted out of the deal. And going forward, I think it's if Jacksonville get the stadium upgrades that they need, it's probably going to continue to stay in Jacksonville. But I still think and I wish that we could get a home and home, because I just think this game is so fantastic that the home crowd should get the opportunity to be the home crowd. It's split in Jacksonville, but the rivalry, I would love to see the Bulldogs go down to Gainesville. I would love to see the Gators come up to Athens.
So the truth of the matter is about to be more complicated than I'm about to describe it as being, but I'm going to ask it this way anyway. What do you think about the idea that, Georgia might go against Kirby Smart's wishes? Kirby Smart has made it clear in the past that he'd like for this game to be a home and home. Now, in the audio clip we played earlier, he's also kind of at times made it clear that the issue is somewhat complicated and there's benefits to Georgia for playing in Jacksonville, and he's fine to acknowledge that. But at just sort of like the face value level, Kirby has said he'd like for the game to be home and home, and at least for 2 more years, Georgia's still not going to do that. And then beyond that, they may still not do that. They may just go against Kirby's wishes because they're going to make more money by playing the game and keeping the game in Jacksonville. What do you make of the idea that, at least in some fashion of discussion here, Georgia may choose money over the wishes of Kirby Smart? How do you feel about that?
If that's the way it is, that would make the world turn, money. And I think Georgia's still in the business of making money, especially for the university, especially for the sport, to be able to pay for all the sports that does not make money. We all know that football takes care of most of the other sports. Most of the other sports is in the red. So I kind of understand it from that aspect, but from Kirby's aspect, I kind of agree with him. There's a lot of times Kirby usually get what he wants. So in this, I think money still rules the world, and we're going to continue to put money over everything because that's what we have normally done. But I'm with Coach Smart. I would love to see the game be played on campus. And,
if you want to kind of play this out a little further, it's like, let's stipulate that Kirby's right, that there would be a benefit to recruiting to have more recruits visiting for the Georgia-Florida game when it was in Athens. Okay, so let's say Kirby's right about that. But I guess the flip side of that is, hey, you like having that money because, I feel like I see Mike Bobo in Arizona all the time, right? It's like that's not cheap. You fly out there to Arizona, you go out there and visit Dylan Raiola or all the recruits that you visit while you are doing something like that. There's obviously a lot of expense related to that, and my understanding is these coaches are never told no about any kind of trip like that they either want to take, feel like they need to take. They just get a chance to do that. Or think about a guy like Todd Hartley. We're going to talk about Jaden Riddell in a moment. A guy like Hartley who just keeps winning these recruiting battles over and over and over again. It seems like Georgia's always able to dig deep and find the money to pay him so he doesn't have to leave. Glenn Schumann didn't have to go be an NFL coordinator this offseason because Georgia paid him big bucks to keep him right here. And over and over again, it seems like, that kind of shows up where, not only does Georgia have the money, but they seem to use it for the right reasons, holding on to good coaches, creating, frictionless recruiting opportunities. So if there is a benefit to playing Georgia, Florida, in Athens for the recruiting part of it, there is also admittedly a benefit to having all this money too, is there not?
Oh, most definitely. Brian, B.A., the old saying is, it takes money to make money.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to be able to, be the leading school spending how many millions on recruiting, we got to be able to fund those recruiting visit trips. So I understand from that standpoint, and I'm sure Kirby does as well, that we are spending money in all the ways that you have asked for. But for us to continue to spend that money, we have to continue to play this game here. This part of where that money comes from. So I understand from the university standpoint, and I also understand from Kirby's standpoint as well.
So moving on to a different topic, yesterday Georgia got some good news with Jaden Riddell, 4-star tight end from Missouri, who made his pledge to the Dogs. This is a big-time recruit, like 55 in the country, right there with Landon Thomas is kind of the best tight end. And I know a lot of times you have to kind of dive in and see some film of these guys. Have you had much chance to see much of Riddell yet? And if you have, what do you think he brings to the table here for Georgia, that tight end spot?
Oh, I've watched the two tight ends that we just got committed, and I've enjoyed watching both of those guys. If you just turn on their tape, you just watch the first two plays, and that's all you need to see is how explosive they are. I think that's the route that Todd Hartley has gone, and he's went out and got those type of players that they're not just blocking tight ends per se. There's guys that could vertically stretch the football field, and both of those guys that we just got committed fits that mold. And Riddell, I just watched on Twitter where he just went and dominated a 707 event. And
wearing sunglasses while he was doing it, Terrence.
Right. So you go out there with sunglasses on and you go out and dominate an event. That's kind of disrespectful to the defensive backs. Like, man, we can't stop him. So he is a talent that I thought this whole time after losing Landon Thomas that I wanted because I saw his talent. And I assumed, as we were speaking last week, he definitely would be one of the guys that Dylan Raiola brought with him. So I love the two tight ends that we got committed. Todd Hartley just continues being the recruiting genius that he is, and congratulations to him.
Yeah, he looks like the villain in like an 80s high school movie. Like he looks like he ought to be in like Cobra Kai beating up Daniel LaRusso or something like that. Like when you're out there playing 7-on-7 with the sunglasses on, the curly locks flowing, like that's the kind of the vibe that he's giving off to me right there.
Oh, most definitely. That's the swagger that he brings, and that's the swagger that he plays with. I mean, if you watch his film, and they line him everywhere up on the field, the X, the Z, the slot, the tax tight end, like he lines up all over the field, and I don't want to compare anybody to Brock, but that mold that Brock is right now, those are the type of tight ends that Todd Hartley is going after.
Well, let me ask you about that part of it, because obviously you're a wide receivers coach, and yet you've also worked with some tight ends, famously Eric Gilbert and guys like that. But I'm kind of curious from your perspective how you have seen the tight end position evolve, where it seems like because of guys like Riddell and certainly because of guys like Brock Bowers and, as you mentioned, other tight ends that Georgia's kind of gone after, that the line of distinction between what's a tight end and what's a wide receiver, it just seems like it gets blurred more and more year after year because of athletes like what we're talking about here with Riddell. Like, what have you seen from the tight end position kind of becoming more like a wide receiver position the way we would have considered that in the past?
You just think about the game has changed. Back 20, 25 years ago, it was more of a running attack. You needed that extra tight end to be that extra offensive lineman, a la Darnell Washington. That's why he was so special. So you had those blocking big tight ends that was not the great vertical pass catchers. But the game has changed right now. You don't see that inline blocking anymore, but because of now you're throwing bubble screens or you're throwing the RPOs to kind of offset if the number in the box dictate to throw an RPO, they're throwing RPOs. If it dictates to run the football, they're going to run it. We call that a light box. So you don't have to have that big blocking tight end anymore. But what we have went to is a bigger wide receiver that could play tight end that has the vertical movement that wide receiver has. I mean, look at Jason Kelsey and that type of way the NFL is going with those tight ends. This is the way the game is played now. Kyle Pitts type of tight ends. Now, Brock Bowers. If you have guys that are just not inline blockers anymore, you're having guys that are being able to line up all over the field and be valuable pieces to an offense, just not an inline blocker anymore, because we do not play football that way anymore.
I think that's a really good description. And you've probably noticed as well, the energy, the excitement that exists for Georgia. 3 commits this week. You've got recruits out there calling their shot that more big names are on the way. Obviously, Dylan Raiola generates a lot of this. But, Terrence, do you get the sense right now that what Georgia fans seem to feel like they see going on, which is, hey, this may end up being the best class that Kirby Smart has had, and it may, statistically speaking, end up being measurably the best recruiting class of all time? I know those are lofty expectations, and obviously, it doesn't take much to sort of get folks kind of thinking big dreams when it comes to recruiting. But right now, it seems like Georgia's in play for a lot of that here at the moment.
Most definitely. I mean, we just got a punter that committed.
Yeah.
So we got specialty guys that want to be a part of this recruiting class. And Coach Kirby is going out, getting punters commit. I haven't watched his film yet, which I will. I'm not going to discriminate against the specialty guys.
I like
I'm going to watch this film as well. But, this class is shaping up, could be possibly on paper, one of his better class, and that's saying a lot. So, I mean, it just seems like the receivers that we had this past weekend just had a great time. I still think it's going to be hard to pull Jeremiah Smith away from Ohio State.
Yeah.
But we're going to do our best. Coach Smart and company is going to kick every rock, and he's never going to leave anything unturned to try to win recruiting battles. And I just think, having a number one quarterback in the fold is going to help, and just winning is going to help as well.
Yeah, I was kind of laughing about Drew Miller, the punter commit, the other day. In a lot of ways, that's one of the most difficult recruitments that Georgia's probably ever had, because the current punter is on social media all the time joking about the fact that he never gets to play. Like, he doesn't get to go out there and kick because the Georgia offense won't let him do it. And so now you got another big-time punter kind of lining up to be a part of the program, even though the current punter's like, hey, I'm just standing on the sideline the whole game. I'm not even getting a chance to play. So it's kind of a funny thing there, but obviously Drew Miller comes in because you always want to have that good punter kind of waiting in the wings.
Oh, most definitely, punter. I mean, you just think about the Tennessee game last year.
Yeah.
That punt that we had was a big part of that game, and the punt probably just had one play, but that 70-yard punt that ended up on the 1-yard line or whatever, that was a big play in that game. And we don't think that the specialties are football players, a lot of people, but that's 1/3 of the game. If you don't have a good snapper, holder, kicker, that can determine games. And just look at Florida State in the early 90s before they broke through. It was just a running joke that it was going to be wide right. So kickers and snappers and holders, those guys are very important pieces of the game. But that is funny, the kicker on Twitter saying he doesn't get to play very much. And that's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
All right, so that's a fun conversation. Let me finish with something that's a little bit less fun, but I'm curious about your opinion. Obviously, the news this week that Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint became the latest Georgia football player to have a little bit of a speeding driving issue, arrested on a speeding charge and some reckless driving type stuff. And, Terrence, here's the sense that I get from hearing from a lot of Georgia fans this week. Like, on the one hand, I don't know that anybody's all that eager to come down too heavy and, overly punitive on one Georgia player like this. Georgia fans don't necessarily want to do that. But on the other hand, they are, I think, genuinely concerned. A large number of them are. And it's not the PR thing of, oh, it's a bad look for Georgia. I think they're genuinely kind of concerned about the Georgia's players' safety. If the words are out, if the reports that are out there are true that, Rosemary Jackson was driving, 90-something miles an hour on a road that was not anywhere near that kind of speed limit, obviously, and kind of weaving in and out of traffic, like that's dangerous. And it's certainly concerning to think that the previous things that have gone on here at Georgia haven't caused a player like this to realize that you're making a very risky decision for yourself and for the other people around you by doing that. So, Terrence, I think everybody right now is trying to figure out, like, what do you do about this? Like, how do you properly convey this message? Because clearly something is not being fully understood here. And, you're a dad, you're a coach, you're a player, you've got a lot of, I guess, ways in which a story like this might impact you. Like, what do you make of what's gone on here?
I think it's the old saying that it's not going to happen to me. Even though you just witnessed 3 close associates, 2 passed, and now Jalen Carter is going through a lawsuit. You was there. You understand the trauma that it caused a lot of families. And the old adage is, oh, it won't happen to me. Well, I don't think that family and those families thought it would happen to their loved ones as well. And not just you. Like, an innocent person could be driving. If you go on that high rate of speeds and you could just tap someone's vehicle, or you just could lose control, and your life has changed forever. So I just think, like, when you got firsthand knowledge, that is on the player. That has nothing to do with Coach Smart. That has nothing to do with the university. This is on that person making bad decisions. When you have seen firsthand what it can do to families for reckless driving. So I just don't understand the thought process to do this. And I know we've all talked about what we have done at that age, and we all in Athens. I have been a victim as well of driving recklessly on Loop 10. So I get it and understand, but you just witnessed 2 loved ones lose their life off of senseless, reckless driving. I just don't understand. And Marcus is a really, really good young man.
Yeah.
Every time I go there, he's very respectful to me and talk to me. And so I just don't understand this thinking. I just needed to get through these young people's heads that, this is not good. Like, this is not good. This speeding can hurt people, and we have seen it. So I just hope from this day forward, everyone in that organization just understands. You just got to make better decisions.
No, Terrence, I think that's really wise, and I appreciate you saying what you said for sure. And obviously, you're working out there with great receivers all the time. And I saw a photo of you on social media the other day. You're out there training and getting folks going, and you got a great collection of players there with you. So for people who want what you're doing this time of year with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, great stuff. I appreciate your time. We'll look forward to talking to you soon right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think that Terrence, what he says there is really true. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this. I feel like we talked about it plenty yesterday, but it is just really hard sometimes to convince anyone. We think about older person talking to a younger person, but sometimes it's hard to convince anybody that, hey, driving a car comes with more risk than you realize. Because there's a certain extent to which if we process the full risk we take every time we drive a car, then we probably wouldn't drive cars. Like, there's an element of which that you have to kind of automate your thinking because, you'd just be frozen. You'd have a hard time actually going out there and driving in a relaxed manner that would allow you to actually operate the vehicle if you fully considered all of the risk and all that kind of stuff. We'd sort of have to automate certain levels of our thinking on that. Now, I'll tell you this. Yesterday I was leaving here, and I was in a hurry. I was trying to get to I had an event with my kids last night, and it's one of those things where I get ready to get on the highway here, and I probably wasn't paying attention as well as I could. And that noise that sometimes you have in your car? Like, I've only recently had a car that has some of these, like, sort of newfangled things. But it kind of does that beeping noise when you're getting too close to a car in front of you. And I just sort of realized I put a lot of faith and trust in my car, right? It beeps when I get too close to a car in front of me. It sort of starts beeping if I start weaving in and out of the lane. And I think you just sort of convince yourself that your car is kind of this magic, fortress that nothing bad can happen while you're in the car because they've gotten so technologically advanced and they seem so safe. But obviously, accidents still happen all the time that we just convince ourselves. I did this when I was young, for sure, but I feel like I probably still do this now sometimes. I convince myself I'm a little safer than I actually am, and maybe we all need to just sort of stop and appreciate the fact that the worst case scenario you've heard about somebody behind the wheel of a car, it could all happen to all of us. And so maybe that goes beyond just the Georgia players, but certainly hope that we don't have to talk about this kind of thing in the news anytime soon, especially in light of some of what has happened here. Now, with that said, we'll get ready to transition to cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I will be gone next week. I will not be on a Royal Caribbean cruise. I do have a nice weekend cruise slated for a little bit later on this summer. Next week, just kind of stepping away from here for a little while and looking forward to doing that. But having something like a great cruise to look forward to from our friends at Royal Caribbean, it just makes the summertime more enjoyable. I know many of you have your own Royal Caribbean cruise experiences you're very excited about, and I love that. I love making those memories, and I love the anticipation of something great like that. Like last night, we were kind of sitting around, and sometimes my kids and I would like to watch some like YouTube videos, the ship we're going to be on, or some of the stuff that Royal Caribbean puts out of kind of just getting excited about what's going on there. That sense of anticipation is just always great, and so I want you to have that feeling yourself, and so I want you to reach out to Jessica Slater. Now, Jessica's a travel agent. She was specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. It's kind of a recommendation of, hey, when you're making your Royal Caribbean cruise bookings, trust Jessica because a great travel agent will make a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise experience even better. So you can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. And she's got you covered on all of that today. And get ready for a great 3-night, 4-night, 7-night, whatever option you think is best for you. A wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise to enjoy. I think you'll be really glad that you did that. All right, so let's do this. Let's go through our cruise around the SEC, couple of stories here. I saw an interesting quote from Greg Sankey the other day that I wanted to read here, where Greg Sankey was on the Greg McElroy podcast, whatever that is called, that ESPN puts out. And Sankey was kind of talking about the fact that his expansion of the SEC is so much better and so much more sensible than what the Big Ten is doing, bringing in USC, UCLA, going far out west to bring them in. Sankey says, hey, what we're doing by comparison is a lot better overall and a lot less tacky than this, land grab that the Big Ten is a part of. Let me read the quote from Sankey, who says, there is something still for us from a geographical standpoint. I've had branding specialists say you could do what Kentucky Fried Chicken did and use KFC, meaning you don't have to be the Southeastern Conference anymore. He says, but that's not really who we are. When we expanded, we added 95 miles basically to our travel. And he says that's our longest trip. It's shorter than the shortest trip that the LA schools have taken the Big Ten. We are still educational entities. We are still moving people from class to class. So Greg Sankey trying to make it be known here that, listen, when we expanded and brought in Texas and Oklahoma, all we did was slightly expand the geographic footprint of the SEC. And we don't feel like we have to stop being the Southeastern Conference just because we're extending far west, because all we have done is provide a little bit of creep compared to where we were before. But the Big Ten, by comparison, I'm paraphrasing here, but how tacky is it? They're going all the way out to L.A. They've got these long road trips. They don't value education anymore. They don't value that. This is all just about money for them. I think that Sankey's mind is in the right place, but I think the execution is the wrong place here. It is fairly obvious that moving forward, the Big Ten is the SEC's enemy, and that there is only so much resource out there. This is not one of those things where it's these are not competitors. These are not, opponents. These are outright enemies, because there is a race to survive in college athletics, and not every league is going to survive. You can certainly point to certain issues with the ACC where, schools have made it be known they'd love to find an exit ramp if they could. In the Pac-12, where Washington State this week has said they've suspended economic activity for the athletic department right now until they figure out how much, reduction their overall payment from the Pac-12 is going to be. That there is a fight to survive going on right now, where the SEC and the Big Ten have clearly distanced themselves from everybody else. But within those confines, there's also a fight to distance itself from each other, SEC versus Big Ten. Right now, the Big Ten is bigger business. Part of the reason why it's bigger business is because they just have bigger schools and bigger alumni bases in some respects, and bringing the two LA schools an example of that. So Sankey kind of taking the veiled shot at the Big Ten, I think his mind's in the right place. But I do believe the attacks on the Big Ten, and I use that with air quotes, I don't mean actual attacks, but I think the outright, recognition and acknowledgement that you are in a real fight for your life against the Big Ten, I think it's going to have to get less passive-aggressive in this going forward and become a lot more overt, kind of pointing out the fact that the Big Ten may have more money, but the SEC's got more success, and that when schools like Ohio State this year, Michigan the previous year, when they go head-to-head against a team like Georgia, they don't win. And bragging more about that and pointing out just how true that really is, we may need to see more of that, because right now the SEC's aligned itself with the ESPN, ABC family of networks. The Big Ten's got Fox and CBS and NBC, and these are two very different leagues. It's not just different philosophies on football. Sometimes it's sort of different ways of life between the states themselves. And so what we see here from Greg Sankey, I think we need to see more of this moving forward. I think it may need to be more overt there as well, that, hey, your rivals within the SEC, that's your competition, but your actual enemy is the league that's trying to take food off your table. SEC versus Big Ten, get ready for a lot more of that in the years to come. Let me also give you this for a brief moment there as well. There was a very strange story at ESPN.com. Now, it's about a week old. I only saw it today. But it's Alex Scarborough, and it's like, how many, profiles in courage is ESPN going to do about Nick Saban? They have profiled this coach 9,000 times. They do it every month, it seems like. This time, the nature of the story is the fact that Nick Saban has finally figured out NIL. And they're kind of revisit a year ago the battle that Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban waged over, what Saban said was Jimbo Fisher buying his entire recruiting class. And Nick Saban basically Jimbo Fisher basically called Nick Saban out for being a hypocrite there on that. We all remember that last summer. It's a very big deal. Well, a year later, the way this story's being spun is that when Nick Saban went public with all of this, it was actually a challenge to his donors and his fans to get serious about NIL and realize the current landscape they were playing in. And Saban may have been a little slow to understand all of this, but eventually he got on board, and now he's trying to lead Alabama towards the future. What drives me crazy about stories like this, these fawning profiles that ESPN constantly does for Nick Saban, if you wonder why Saban is interviewed by ESPN so much, it's because of favorable coverage like this. That's almost always the offshoot of all of that. But nonetheless, what drives me crazy about all of this is that there are certain facts omitted from evidence here. The idea, first of all, that Alabama's kind of painted as an underdog because it has less NIL to spend than some other programs. Miami, Texas A&M get cited. But the facts that don't seem to get entered into evidence here is that while A&M had a huge recruiting class in the 2022 cycle, the 2023 cycle wasn't quite as successful for them, that whatever monetary advantage they had seemed to have been a little short-lived. And if you look at the current recruiting rankings now for Miami, who was a big spender in the previous recruiting cycle, those checks aren't cashing quite the same level right now. So, first of all, that's one of those things that seem to get ignored. But maybe more importantly than that, Nick Saban is sort of painted as a guy who had no NIL advantages and has had to kind of figure out a way to kind of build up the Alabama program around that. They've got a new collective in place at Alabama, replacing a previous collective that I guess wasn't very successful. But no one ever seems to remember that when NIL first got started, Saban was in the state of Texas speaking to Booster Club there, or Coaches Convention, whatever it was, bragging about the fact they were paying Bryce Young $1 million. So Saban's one of these guys that loves to sort of have it both ways. He does that even now. At one point in time, Saban was all about the 9-game SEC conference schedule, but now that it seems like that's about what the SEC might do, now all of a sudden Saban's whining about having to play LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn each and every year, even though they've always played Tennessee, Alabama, and LSU Auburn and LSU each and every year. They've always done that. All of a sudden now Saban doesn't like it anymore. Saban just has a lot of comfort arguing both sides of an issue and being completely hypocritical and opposite and in sharp contrast to his previous comments whenever it suits him. So Saban now in ESPN.com is portrayed as this crusader of trying to catch up and fight against these NIL bullies that have more money than he did. But when things first got started, Saban was more than happy to kind of brag and act like he had more NIL resources available to his program than anybody else did. That, Saban's relationship with the truth seems to be somewhat casual at times, and he seems to be very comfortable arguing on both sides of an issue. But there'll never be any shortage of media folks who kind of help him tell the story that he wants to portray. Maybe the latest example of that coming from ESPN. We will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, full confession here just for a moment before we wrap up today's show. Next week, one of the really fun things we're going to do is we're going to kind of have a little bit of a theme. Now, not the beginning of the show. We're going to kind of do a traditional beginning to our show next week. But with some of our guests like Mike Griffith and Jeff Sentell and some of the things that I'm doing for our SEC through and things like that, we're going to kind of focus in on a lot of bold predictions. We're just kind of getting to that time of year where it's time to start kind of going on the record a little bit about some of the stuff that you think might happen here this season. So next week, we're going to do some of that as it relates to bold predictions. So I invited you to share your bold predictions with me, and I got so many good ones, and I've wanted to kind of make that a part of what we do next week. Admittedly, though, we've kind of bitten off a lot here on this because I've shared a lot of them in some of the shows we pre-recorded, and I still have not quite gotten everything in. So between today and tomorrow, I think tomorrow we may do some of this as it relates to our R.S. Andrews cool down, which I'm really excited about doing. But we're going to kind of share some other bold predictions that you sent in to me for Georgia here this year as a way of previewing a lot of what I'm going to do, Jeff Sintel's going to do, Mike Griffith's going to do. Connor Riley did that with us when he joined us on Tuesday. Next week, we're just going to kind of do a little bit of a bold prediction theme. And some of that's going to include what you shared with me as your own bold predictions for Georgia for this upcoming season. So let me do this, Michael, if you don't mind. Can I just see one more page of these bold predictions for right now? We'll do more of these tomorrow to kind of finish this up. But here's like one more really good page of Twitter responses I got from you with your bold predictions for the upcoming season. So some of these are very ambitious, including Carlos Folsom, who says the Georgia defense is going to have at least 5 shutouts, and Carson Beck, if he stays healthy, is going to pass for 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns. So there you go. Georgia's going to win every game by 100 points, I guess, if that's the case. If nobody's scoring and Beck's throwing for 40 touchdowns, obviously you're in a pretty good spot there if you're Georgia. So that's the kind of fun thing we hear this time of year there on that. Go Dog Sickum writes in to say that Georgia's going to go 15-0 again. You love that. Go for 3-23. D-Dog01 kind of says the same thing. Undefeated, 3-peat national champions. He says, go freaking Dogs there on that. So he's feeling very good about that. Kersey Stone writes in to say, he says, I will once again fall victim to the idea that Georgia will have a 1,000-yard receiver this year. So Kersey kind of playing the other side of this of, hey, we've kind of promised the notion of a 1,000-yard receiver before. It hasn't quite come true. Sounds like Kersey's still a little skeptical of that occurring here this year. So we'll have to see on that. Louisiana Dogs, though, feels completely different, saying Georgia's going to have 2 1,000-yard pass catchers because our running backs are banged up again. So a little concerned about that. He says leaning on that passing game a little bit more would be interesting to think about who those 2 might be. Maybe at least one idea for me on that next week. Hollis McCall says there's no bolder prediction than saying that Georgia will be the back-to-back-to-back national champions. Hollis, that's very good. Dave Anthony predicts that Mikael Williams going to have 20 sacks. That's a lot of fun to think about. Mick the Stick 6 says, I'm a negative Nancy, but I think someone might jump up and get him this year. In other words, losing a regular season game. Kirby Smart's definitely on guard about that right now. Obviously, anything is possible, and Georgia's trying to make sure they are more than ready for the grind of a long 12-game schedule where you saw it last year with Missouri. Somebody can kind of sneak up on you when you least expect it. So being ready for every game, every time, obviously very important for UGA. Schaefer says they will not trail in the fourth quarter of any of their 15 games. So a march towards a 3rd straight national championship, Schaefer predicts, which is a lot of fun. Tucker Harris predicts Dominic Lovett to go over 1,000-yard receiving here this year. Jay Craig, we got a couple of these. Jay Craig predicts an 8-4 season. Now, my guess is that Jay doesn't actually think that Georgia's going to go 8-4. My guess is that Jay, because I got somebody said 7-5 there too. My guess is this is a little bit of a play on the famous Nolan Smith deal of predicting Georgia to be 8-4, 7-5 as a way of providing the proper motivation. So Jay says I'll step up and I'll be the new Nolan Smith this year, telling you that he thinks that Georgia's going to go 8-4. So Jay using a little bit of a subliminal motivational tactic there. That's pretty fun. Coach Chad says the offense is going to average 50 to 52 points per game. The defense is going to allow 6.5 to 9 points per game. Once again, if that be the case, then Georgia's marching its way to a very easy season, which maybe it happens that way. Chris Dixon also says Georgia going 15-0 there as well. So we've gotten a lot of those. We'll share some more fun ones with you on that next week. It's just going to be a great time to kind of do some bold predictions, lay the groundwork for exactly what we think may play out for Georgia here this year. And I haven't quite been able to get all the great ones that I got as a part of next week's pre-recorded shows. So I'm going to try to sneak in some today and then tomorrow and then have some fun with you on all of that as we do that next week. With that said, let's wrap up today's show. Great golden shoe today. We Are Dog Nation shares this. It's a new season coming on Netflix of Kirby's We Hunt. three-peat season, 100 days to kick off, which, by the way, that it is. 100 days to kick off. Kirby got the hunting fatigues on right there, rifle in hand. Or is that a bow? I can't tell. Either way, he's ready to go for hunting season for these dogs. And I love that for Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. That is great stuff. By the way, speaking of 100 days till kickoff, we got a great new series starting on our DawgNation social channels there as well. You're going to love part of our 100-day countdown there, too. I think you're going to really like that, looking back at some of the really fun moments from the very recent past. Can't wait to share that with you on our DawgNation social channels there as well. But congratulations, we are DawgNation Fun Golden Shoe winner there today. We'll have a good collection of shoes again tomorrow to kind of wrap up our week. And lousy, stinking Gators, well, they're going to be wrapping things up in not quite such a glorious fashion. 156 days from right now, that is our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, I'm going to get your comments. We'll see how everyone's doing, and we'll kind of roll into a busy Thursday. You guys got a lot going on right now. We got last day of school for the kids. I joked about this with my friends in the Athens radio station, 960 Ref. We have like 3 different pool parties over the course of like a 12-hour span. My kids' life this time of year is like just one long ice cream social, it seems like. So I'm very jealous of them, but very happy to be sitting here talking to y'all today. Let's see what else. Philip Jordan Wells, good to see him as always. Bill Sanders and Kevin Cook talking about the idea of running backs, and Bill says it's kind of like pitching in baseball. When you think you have enough, you still need more. Yeah, running backs is one of those positions where you can kind of certainly feel the grind, obviously over the course of a long season. And I think my issue for the Georgia running back situation is not so much do you have enough bodies. I think that on paper it sort of seems like they do. I think my issue is more related to, is a player or two going to really emerge as kind of top-end type performers. And like one of the things, I did not make this one of my bold predictions for next week, but I certainly could have because I believe there's reason to argue for this, is that I still am pretty bullish on Kendall Milton for this year. I still believe that Milton going to shake off the spring injury, going to be, I'm hoping, certainly healthy for the lion's share of the upcoming season. And I think that Kendall Milton's going to prove to be the kind of running back that Georgia can really lean on, depend on. And I could see Milton being a 1,000-yard rusher. Georgia actually hasn't had a 1,000-yard rusher in a little while here. I think that Milton could be that guy here this year. So when you look at the total number of running backs that Georgia has, including some of the the walk-on type guys, Savon Clark coming back, Lynette Whitehead coming in, it seems like there's a good number of running backs in the program right now. But who's going to really kind of be your front-end performers? Is it Milton? Who's going to be the guy that catches the ball for you out of the backfield? That's what Kenny McIntosh did. That's what James Cook did before that, and what Sonny Michel did before that. Those are, to me, the more significant unanswered questions as it relates to running back, and hopefully we can find out positive answers to those questions very early on in the season. Let's see what else. Jeff Ingram says that Milton's only issue is the injuries, and I think that's right. And listen, I don't put that on him. I mean, some people start to ask questions when there's a string of injuries together. I think one of the things that sports fans, sports media often incorrectly do is string together stories and connect them when there isn't necessarily obvious connective tissue there. And in the case of the Milton injuries, I do believe he's dealt with some bad luck, but ultimately, and we've talked to former players about this, it seems like there's a fairly strong consensus that all this really is just bad luck, that Milton's just kind of dealt with that. And so the idea that somehow Kendall won't be able to be healthy this year because he's had some issues with that in the past, I haven't heard anybody that I truly respect who shared that as a legitimate concern. And so I think that obviously you are hopeful that Kendall is able to stay healthy, but there's certainly no reason to believe that he won't, just because he's had some issues with that in the past. And as you say, if he is healthy, then the odds are Georgia probably has itself a top-flight running back. Let's see what else. A.J. Ferraro talking about something as it relates to. I don't know anything about that, A.J. I'll keep my eye out for that. I don't know anything about that. But we'll certainly keep our eye there for that. Let's see what else. Alan Rabanchi going back to last year saying that Kendall was running the best that he'd seen him from the latter part of the season. Yeah, I mean, listen, when he is healthy, he really, I mean, he has a beautiful stride as a running back. There's no doubt about that. Let's see what else. Keith Folds calling for Brock Bowers to New York City. I like the idea of that. I like the idea of that. Joseph Kennedy says I should work from a cruise ship, cooking food and talking dogs. Yeah, like when I go on a cruise, oftentimes one of the things I'm looking forward to is kind of the unplugging part of that, like sort of disconnecting from life. But if I could figure out a way to stay like fully connected there, internet and things like that, I might just spend my entire off season just sort of cruising from one place to the next. That would be pretty fun. That'd be pretty fun. So Miriam Court and Bill Sanders asking about vacation. So I've got vacation week next week, and I pretty much do this every year, right? Early summer. If you think about it, we take a vacation week every year, early summer. In addition to that, I'm going to be gone over a long weekend, kind of late June, and that's it. So we take a week's vacation every year. That's what this is. And in addition to that, because we are taking my mom on a cruise, we're going to take a little bit of a long weekend type thing late June. So I'll be gone for like a little bit at the end of the week and a slight little bit one day at the beginning of the next week, and that's it. So once you kind of think about kind of getting through June on that, July, obviously all through, basically from like July 4th until President's Day, we won't take any time off. We don't take any time off. We won't take anything. So a little bit here in June, this week, which really is only 4 days because one of those is Memorial Day, and a little bit of a long weekend in kind of late-ish June. Those are the two times I'm going to be taking off. And then from, like my season in my mind kind of always begins right after July 4th. Like July 4th sort of ends my summer. July 5th, if you will, kind of begins what I sort of think of as my in-season time. And, like I said, from that point through President's Day, we are hardcore ready to go. And that'll be the similar thing we sort of adopt here this year there as well. Sandy Price, excited about Sammy Brown. I like that too. For sure. Miriam Corbin, yeah, I appreciate that. No problem at all. All right, let me get a few comments over here on YouTube for a second. On YouTube, Colby Strouder gives a not-so-bold prediction. Georgia has 2 Heisman finalists, Carson Beck and Brock Bowers, and multiple in the conversation. That would be a lot of fun. That'd be a lot of fun. Nature Gator said he had a friend who passed away a few years ago in a big insurance policy. His wife sold everything and decided to cruise full-time. She's been doing it for years. That's really interesting. I have heard of that before. Nature, the other thing I've kind of heard of is so now, and I don't think I don't know if we're going to advertise this or not, but so Royal Caribbean has this thing now where you can do a true like around-the-world cruise. And it's like 240 days or something like that. I mean, it's obviously a very niche product, right? Only a small number of people, could do that, both financially or, whatever else, time-wise too. But there is like this sort of like around the world cruise you can take with the Royal Caribbean where it's like, I want to say it's like, I'm not sure how much it costs. I'm guessing it's obviously not, it is not for the budget-minded, I'm guessing. So it's not, a very well-known product necessarily, but it's like 240 days or something like that. Kind of a crazy thing. And I believe I have heard, like I said, of a couple people who do theoretically sort of live on ships. They just move from one to the next. But that's obviously a very niche type, type audience there. Andrew Hughes asking about Mekhi Muse. I really feel that Muse could be very much in line for playing time. And I mean, I think he could potentially find his way on the field as a wide receiver. I think he probably has a lot of value to Georgia as a special teams guy. Because the thing that Kirby said about Muse was, sometimes you kind of throw water on the G-Day superstar, and Muse kind of was a little bit of a G-Day superstar. But in the case of Muse, Kirby Smart said he practices like that all the time. Like, that's what he does every single day. So when Kirby says that leads me to believe they kind of like the way the guy's working. Probably a little bit like what maybe Jalen Johnson would have been a couple of years ago. I know that Johnson as kind of a walk-on was always pretty close to getting playing time, and I don't quite know how much it always worked out, but he was definitely a candidate to be on the field. And I would say that Muse right now is a candidate to be on the field. Thomas Dyson says, give me all the Muse and the Cash Jones stock. One thing I got to say about Cash Jones is you talk about, a receiver out of the backfield. Cash can catch the ball out of the backfield now. Plus, that Cash Jones is kind of a cool name. Let's see what else. Thomas Tyson says that Bowers like 50 yards short of 1,000 last year. I think if we can get him there. Yeah, I do too. I mean, to me, it just sort of seems like the natural progression. I really do. And plus, one of the things I'm going to highlight next week is what Kirby said about Brock the other day, that I think Georgia kind of knows they've got one more chance to really use what has been a special player. And I believe that Georgia's going to use Bowers more. Last year at times, Georgia was fairly content not to use Brock Bowers very much. And I don't know that this year they're necessarily going to be that way. Let's see what else. JC says, old Kirby made it to the top of the mountain and planted his flag and has told the rest of college football to come get it. Good luck. Yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, I think Kirby understands power dynamics, and so I think he understands the fact that now as a leader of this Georgia program, he's kind of in a position of strength, and now Georgia's going to lean on that strength, right? Georgia's, like the one thing you're not going to see Kirby doing is poor-mouthing about their NIL or anything like that, because I don't think that Kirby wants the perception of weakness out there. And, I think that Georgia also kind of plays at the level. Certainly, there may be more desperate NIL programs than Georgia is, but I don't know how many programs truly play at a higher level from an NIL standpoint than Georgia does. It's just kind of an example of the fact that I think that Kirby likes giving off the appearance of strength. I think he likes giving off and demonstrating the perception that Georgia is the strongest program out there, and they are recruiting players on the basis of that strength, and that's why you see guys like Dylan Raiola respond to it, and the guys that are going to then follow Raiola in his footsteps there, that the way you described it, I think really is true, is that Kirby sort of established the high ground, and now he's going to use that advantage to sort of bludgeon his competition even more. I think you may be right. Let's see what else. Frederick Meredith says, I can see a 1,000-yard season for Bowers, but Georgia spreads it around too much for him to get to 1,500. That's probably true, I would say. I would also say that while I am very high on what Dominic Lovett can provide for Georgia, that's also an example where, I wonder if his overall numbers don't end up being a little lower this year than they were last year, just because he's going to be playing as a part of a deeper offense now. And if you look at what Ladd McConkey did last season, McConkey, he's about 800 yards, 700-something yards last year. I mean, if you say, well, full year now, Varian Smith, he's healthier than he's been. And Georgia's got some freshman receivers that I believe are going to play this year. Do you start betting the under on some of these individual receiving totals because there are going to be more guys in line to be involved? Well, let us see what else. Foster Moss also participating in the negative fodder for Georgia. Foster more than happy to be bulletin board material, saying I got Georgia going 6-6, just edging out Vandy to be bowl eligible. Georgia on Tap says counting out Nick Saban's like counting out Ric Flair after a couple of 2 counts. Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I mean, I think it's probably wise to be slow to certainly throw dirt on Nick Saban. I do. I'd also say that some people who are quick to assume that Saban does have one big final shot at glory here, I think you also got to be careful about that there as well. That sometimes the facts entered as evidence do portray where things are heading, and it could be that Alabama's not very good this year. But if any coach is capable of getting something out of nothing, it may be Nick Saban. Frank Patterson says with the schedule changes and better games coming to Athens, Goat Kirby could lessen his stance on the cocktail party being in Jacksonville. Yeah, that's certainly a possibility that Georgia, one way or another, is going to probably have more better games coming to Athens soon. I don't mean more better. I mean more better games. That could certainly be the case, and maybe that makes him feel like he doesn't need it quite as bad. That's maybe the case. I think a lot of this also probably centers around, we talked to Mike Griffith about this yesterday. Another thing that I thought was for sure heading one way that I'm not quite as sure about now is like the potential announcement about a 9-game conference schedule for the SEC. It seems like that's what they should do. It's going to be a huge disappointment to me if they don't, but financially, it's not obvious they're going to get what they feel like they deserve if they make that decision. And giving that to ESPN for free would seem to be acting against their own best interest. So could have a little bit of drama with the spring meetings next week. Sometimes this kind of stuff, like the boardroom stuff, the procedural stuff, I realize that kind of tunes some people out. I do understand that. Next week in Destin may not be too bad. I'll obviously be back to talk to you about it all next week, but the following week, But next week in Destin may not be that bad. James K says, what's your best bet for a 9-game this year? It's either South Carolina or Ole Miss, right? It's got to be one of those two, right? South Carolina or Ole Miss. And I think some of that probably depends on what the other games in the conference are that day. But it's got to be one of those two, right? Because obviously you're referencing a home game. Is there an easy way to see one of those grid schedules? Let's see. Let's see if we can do this. That is not it. Let's try this again. All right. Is this going to be it? All right. This may be it. So, September 16th, Georgia hosts South Carolina. You have got Tennessee, Florida is the same day. So could you get Tennessee, Florida on CBS, leaving Georgia to be drafted for a night game there? But the truth is, that's a pretty weak schedule, y'all. Assuming that CBS is doing a game at 3:30 that day, would you rather have South Carolina playing against the defending national champions or Florida hosting Tennessee? What if Florida loses by 2 touchdowns week 1 to Utah? Does CBS want that there in that spot? Ugh, I don't know about that. And then you look later in the year when Georgia hosts Ole Miss. Alabama's at Kentucky that day. Auburn, Arkansas that day. Florida, LSU that day. Mississippi State, A&M that day. Yeah, that's a little bit tricky to sort of figure out what they might do on November the 11th there in that spot. But September 16th, it's 3:30 is going to either be Florida, Tennessee, or Georgia, South Carolina, and then you wonder, okay, well, we've seen ESPN sort of swoop in and put a game at noon. You also have Texas, Alabama, I should say. No, that's the week before. I'm sorry, yeah. So you've seen them sort of swoop in and put a game at noon before, too. So some of this TV stuff is a little bit tricky to predict right now because of the fact that at times they do value that noon window. But Georgia, I would think, would be in play for 3:30 on September 16th. So you may have a little bit of a hard time doing that. Now, also, not every night game is a big game, right? Sometimes night games are weak games. Sometimes they put you on the SEC network because you're not, it's not that big of a game. So when you start thinking about a Georgia, Missouri, could you see that game being at night? That's November 4th. That's the same day as Alabama, LSU. That same day as Ole Miss, Texas A&M. Yeah, so do you maybe get a night game spot there? I guess that's possible. Let us see what else. Paul Moon says Bear would have been in the rotation pretty heavy, or at least I would have been shocked if he weren't. Problem was he doesn't want to be in a rotation. He wants to be the guy at defensive tackle. That is certainly the case. I think the caption from his Instagram post the other day suggests that he's, tired of fitting in, ready to stand out, or whatever it is they wanted to say. But USC's defense was terrible. And Georgia's putting defensive linemen in the first round of the NFL draft, one right or the other. If he thinks the USC situation is going to be better for his football future, I don't know what to tell him. Now, if he wants the apartment, if he wants the attention you get out in LA, at least until they lose their third game, then good for him there on that. But USC's defense was an absolute joke. And it's the kind of thing that's followed Lincoln Riley for his entire career, whether it be at Oklahoma, whether it be, now at USC. They just don't play defense. Croaking 123 says we'll be fine without him. Yeah, I don't mind telling you this. I hope that we're able to talk about this with the kind of the full breadth of the full conversation. I like Bear as a player. I think he's talented. I'd like to have had him here. Obviously, Georgia is better if Bear Alexander's still here. But that's not the same thing as saying that Georgia will be miserable without him. Georgia's going to probably still be fine. And if I had to bet on Georgia without Bear or Bear without Georgia, I don't think there'd be much surprise which of those two entities I think is probably in a better position moving forward. Let's see what else. Nature Gator says those red LED lights for Georgia have been a poor investment. Yeah, I don't know that anything's ever been spent more money on to have been used less than those LED lights at Georgia. I guess the only thing being used less right now is Florida's trophy case, I guess. That's about it, maybe. Let's see what else. Alex Davis says, don't forget big baby Jordan Hall. I think he's a really sharp prospect. I do. Andrew Hughes says, let's get a dog cruise around the state of Florida to display our dominance. Start at Jacksonville in the Gulf somewhere. I wouldn't mind that. Now, Jones Act requires you to leave, touch a foreign port, and then come back, of course. So we'd have to go somewhere. We'd have to go to Bermuda or the Bahamas or somewhere before we came back. But yeah, circling around Florida, I wouldn't mind doing that. Oh yeah, James K did say they turned the lights on for graduation the other day, which was nice to see. Memphis Dog says the A.D. Mitchell transfer was for family. The Bear transfer was for money. A.D. deserves more respect. My thing about the A.D. Mitchell transfer is my respect for A.D. was what he gave to Georgia while he was here. He caught the game winner against Ohio State, the go-ahead touchdown against Alabama. That if he wants to go somewhere else after that, I'll shake his hand and say, hey, thanks for what you did here. And if going to Texas for whatever reason he chooses to, money, family, whatever else, A.D. Mitchell gave Georgia a lot. Could he have given it more in one more year? And would he be better off here at UGA? I guess different people can have different opinions on that. But I got no beef with A.D. Mitchell. I've got no beef with him whatsoever. He gave a lot to Georgia while he was here. Big-time penchant for catching big-time touchdowns. And if he's ready to go somewhere else for his final year or whatever, the conclusion of his career, however long it lasts, more power to him. I believe that. I don't feel that way about every transfer. There are a couple of transfers like the Bear Alexander thing. We don't feel quite the same way about that. Not everybody who leaves Georgia is a DGD. In my mind, A.D. Mitchell is. He is a DGD, I guess, if you want to say it like that. Frederick Meredith says, what's up with the defensive line recruiting? Yeah, I can't get too worked up about anything like that. Yeah, I just can't. I think you've expressed this before. But right now, they're loaded. So I guess let's see what happens when they really need somebody, right? And let's also kind of wait and see on a Justin Scott or something like that too, I guess. I don't know. But I can't get too messed up on that. Nature Gator, I was just kidding about the trophy case. I was just kidding. He says the Florida trophy case and the brand new state-of-the-art athletic facility packed full of trophies. I'm just kidding, Nature. I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time. Let's see what else. What time is it? All right, we got to get ready to go. Let me go DawgNation.com for a second, see what people are saying over there. And then after that, we'll take one more spin and be gone. DT says that the NIL is less than the NFL's. Bear's going to find that out. Yeah, I mean, over the course of the long haul, you just got to be very, very careful. DT says Munkham is not playing all his cards with Brock Bowers, so he could bust him out when needed. Yeah, I mean, I think when they got to the national championship game last year, I sort of think they just sort of decided there was nothing else to save anything for, so they just they broke every glass, started using everything. Brock Bowers was just unleashed, and you realize once again just how unstoppable he really is. Senior Dog 54 says Mew's also really smart. That never hurts. Totally agree with that. Monkster brings up a good point. Like when I go on a cruise, I do like a little bit of a relaxed atmosphere. I do, probably have the extra serving of this or whatever that, both food and beverage at times. So that's one of those things that even if I could cruise all the time, I'd probably need a little break every now and then, just because part of the fun for me when it comes to the cruise is the little bit of indulgence that goes on with that. That's part of it. DT says, I have a very good agent, lots of vacation time. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, because you got to understand something like, and I know no one's going to be, shedding tears, but like on the DawgNation cruise, we're working, right? We're helping people have a good time on the cruise. And I know that doesn't come across that way, but that's part of it. So really, I mean, the sum total of my vacation, typically speaking, is I'll take a week in February, take a week in the summertime, and hopefully a little long weekend in addition to that. I mean, really, a lot of y'all take a lot more vacation than I do. Because the other thing I did back in December, that was also for work as well. So some of that ends up being for work, which I realize sounds obnoxious, but you know what I'm saying. Bill Russell heading off to the gym. Have a good day, Bill. We're glad to have you here. Randy Hall predicting this starting 2024 offensive line. He's got Blask at center, Morris and Ratledge at guard. Tate coming back would certainly be interesting. And then Green and Freeling at the tackle spots. That'd be an interesting one, especially if Ratledge were to come back. DT says we miss you when you're gone. The truth is, DT, I miss being here too. We really don't I wouldn't want to be gone any more than I am because I enjoy doing the show. I love doing the show. Rambo says not everybody fits in the UGA culture, and that's fine. I agree with that. I think we talked about this yesterday, that the good thing about college sports these days is you have the opportunity to sort of self-select. You can kind of on the front end make a decision about what's right for you, and Georgia is not right for everybody, and everybody's not right for Georgia. So that's okay, right? I mean, there is something to be said for you should try to build the program how you want to, and USC building its program just like Georgia would be a kind of a foolish thing to do because Georgia's already doing this very well. And so being a different kind of program, a program that kind of leans into the sort of glitzy, glamorous, less substantial parts of football, that's probably a wise decision. Giving people a chance that think they might like that better, to go try that better. And, kind of leaning on what you think you can do well and trying to zig when somebody like Georgia's maybe zagging. I get the idea that programs are going to approach things a little bit differently and let players choose what's right for them. And the only thing I've ever asked for when it comes to stuff like this is let's just keep track of the record. Let's just keep track. Let the record speak for themselves. And I don't have a bad thing to say about Bayer, but if Bayer goes to USC, if he ends up, kind of being a part of a mediocre defense, if he ends up having a lackluster experience because USC doesn't make the college football playoff or something like that, then we ought to notice that. We ought to point that out that, hey, or if a guy like Baer goes there and doesn't follow in the footsteps of a Jalen Carter or a Devontae Wyatt or a Jordan Davis or a Trayvon Walker, we ought to notice that. I think it ought to be fair to point that out. I don't mean that harshly. I don't mean that trollingly. I'll never say a bad thing about Bear Alexander personally, but this is big business. And proof of concept is a part of how you sell your business. And guys doing better here than players other places, those comparisons are fair, I believe. From Frank Patterson says the silver lining for Baylor leaving is you got another scholarship to give to a running back or a tight end. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe Georgia's going to bring 1,000 tight ends this year. Maybe that'll be the case. All right, anything else? G. Grace also pointing out that for Alabama, sometimes you have the same thing. It's like, I think that some players over the course of years have probably liked the idea of going to Alabama. Hey, I'm gonna go down there, built by Bama, whatever else. Well, listen, when Alabama was really cranked up and humming, that's a tough place to play. It's hard to earn playing time there, and you had to really show yourself to get on the football field. And I'm guessing over the course of time that it has not worked out for everybody. I mean, we can cite examples of some 5-star guys that just didn't quite blossom there. Some along the defensive line, places like that, where just didn't happen for them because Alabama has asked a lot from its players over the years, and that's not something everybody's going to just love. Andrew Hughes says, can't we just sail to Alabama? That ain't foreign enough. Listen, based on some of what goes on there, it starts to feel more and more foreign every day, I guess. Paul Moon says, can't wait to see Javon Bullard even with more room to roam. Yeah, I think him at safety could be a lot of fun. Rambo says, talking about Connor sitting behind a cardboard cutout. So when I do take the cruise later on this summer, I think at least one day, probably one day out of that time, we'll probably do something different at 10 a.m. that won't quite be DawgNation Daily. But we did that the other day. It worked out pretty well. We may do that again at some point in time. It didn't quite work out for us to do that for next week, but we may do that again at some point in time. Anything else on Facebook before we go? All right, good stuff. Really fun times. So live show for us again tomorrow, and then I'm out after that and very much excited about all of that. So as your summer gets started, I hope it is a good one for you. Y'all check out our friends at the AJC online, ajc.com. You can follow Braves salvage part of the series with the LA Dodgers last night. Fun walk-off win for them. That was a great thing to be able to see. Also, by the way, you got Celtics Heat again tonight, Eastern Conference Finals. So you got that going on. Congratulations to Ozzy Albies, who was a part of the big Braves walk-off last night. Josh Brooks came up just short on winning some sort of award for athletic directors. So you can follow more of that there, too. And how about the nation's best burger? Unlikely restaurant in Atlanta. You can read more about that online at ajc.com there as well. But I also want you to check out our friends at R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Air conditioning, it's summer, it's here, it's going to be warm, hot weather. Go ahead and stay cool and comfortable all season long with our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can get your old unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs, and it may only cost you $99. So check them out today online at rsandrews.com. You have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.